Hello everybody. It's nice to see so many people active in chat already. It's freaking awesome. I hope everyone is doing well. Hope everyone has a great day. I'm still sorting out some stuff for the stream, but because I tried to do something really fancy, but it wasn't fancy enough yet. So I'm paying for trying to be fancy, but we should be good. We should be good. Let's actually do this for a little bit. Oh, I still need to change the moving background. Yeah. Also, angled my camera, cleaned up that corner, less junk to see, even though there's still like a bunch of junk over there. But hey. Like I was saying, hope everyone is doing well. Hope you're all ready to dive into another WIP Wednesday. I'm going to be looking at a whole bunch of cool people's stuff. I think we got 15 people for today. So it's going to be another packed session. So yeah. Fancy. Nice. Yeah. Doing a little bit of cleanup, you know? That's one of the benefits of working from home, that you don't have to do like any commuting, even though the commute is not that bad now. But like it saves you a little bit of time, so I just spent a little bit of it cleaning up, you know? Yeah, how's everybody doing? How was everyone's day? Let's start there. What has everyone been up to? My day was pretty standard. Pretty standard. Just working, and then after work, made some stir-fried rice and tried to do some prep for the stream, which I'm really happy with like the setup that I have now for like setting up the stream, because I'm trying to sort of like automate like a certain part of it where it automatically picks up like everyone's work and it dumps all the images on the server that I have, which is something that I only discovered recently because I was looking into it for months and months and could never figure it out. But I did figure it out recently, so I'm really happy that I can now just like grab it, all the stuff from everybody, add it to like a local folder that I have on my server, and then I can just like have everything, well, not everything set up because I still need to set up like all the templates, but I have all the images already. So I'm really happy with that setup, even though the setup was a little bit janky. So there were some issues with it as well that I need to figure out like in the coming days. But we have something that is going to help me out in the future. So I'm really happy with that so far. Looking clean. Thanks, Sulon. Thanks, Ryan. Guillaume is working in ZBrush. Hell yeah. ZBrushing away. Darkon is saying it's amazing so far. Working and working. I got it. On the grind set. Looking at normal maps for a bit. Oh. You're just staring into normal maps. As we all do from time to time, you know? Just getting carried away in like the endless void of a normal map. And Bodhi is finally happy with the grass that I made. Oh shit, that's awesome. I don't think I've seen your work recently. I don't know if you're like uploading it or not. I'm not keeping track of the majority of people that are putting like awesome work out there. Yeah, it's gonna be cool to see the people that have flagged themselves for WIP Wednesday. I'm excited. It's gonna be awesome. Yeah. I think without further ado, we should get into it, right? We got a bunch of people to get through, so we need to get cracking. Bodhi says, haven't posted much. That's fine. You don't have to. I'm just always curious, you know? Always curious. So let's switch it over and let's get started. For people that are new to the concept of this, this is a weekly live stream that I do for our community members where they can basically go into our Discord server. There's like a forum channel that's called Work in Progress, and you can add a tag called WIP Wednesday, and then whatever comes up, I'll have a look at it and try to give feedback. As a reminder that for the people that are participating in it now and will participate in the future, feel free to ask any questions because that is really, really helpful, right? Yeah, that's gonna help both myself and yourself a lot as well, that I can focus my feedback on like specific things, because otherwise I will probably like skip one or two people because they haven't asked like any specific questions and I'm not sure if they need any feedback, but we're gonna dive into that in a little bit. Is having a mentor once a month for guidance for a year worth it? That depends on what you're looking for. Right? So it's a good question, Olaf, but it depends on what you're looking for. Sarav is saying, been a while since I've been here for live sessions. Yeah, good to see you back, Sarav. Happy to have you. But yeah, like, having a mentor is never a bad thing. It just depends on the costs and the frequency and like what you want to learn from them as well, right? I would say from a mentor once a month, you're not relying on like any in-depth feedback or any in-depth guidance necessarily. It's more to help you on your path like once a month and just be like, hey, looked at your work. This is what you need to do in the coming month, and then figure it out yourself, what you need to do in between, right? So you kind of have like guidance or like a clear path what you need to do on like a monthly basis. But whenever you get stuck with something, like they're not necessarily going to be there when you need them, right? So I would kind of look at it as from a perspective of a little bit less hand-holdy than a full mentorship, which is usually like once a week that you meet with people, right? That looks awesome. These colors are looking lovely. Yeah, they do. We are gonna skip this one for just a little bit though. We're gonna jump on over to Vicki first. Let's have a look. Where's Vicki? Here we go. I think we're gonna get warmed up with a couple of quick ones, right? And then we can dive into the more thicker ones in a little bit. Last thing, if you're just in the chat, feel free to hop in. Feel free to add your feedback as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat too. Usually what I try to do is like weave questions in between people, right? So if you have any questions, feel free to add them and then we can discuss them in between. Okay. So I think Vicki only has one question here based on like this image over here, which is one specific question I would like to ask is how do I get this paint peeling effect all over my walls? Adding a reference for the same as well, right? So a paint peeling effect, what you usually want to do, or like the most common approach, depending on how basic your interpretation is you want to do that in Substance Designer. And you kind of want to simulate like this sort of feel to it. Now, the limitation there is going to be that if you want like heavy peels, right? If you want like really thick peeling paint where you can really, really tell that there's like big flaps coming off the walls, right? If you want that sort of effect, just doing it in a texture is not going to be enough. So that's at that point, we need to look into actual geometry to support the texture underneath as well. So for this though, it doesn't look like it would necessarily need it. I think you would be surprised at what you can get away with just like a flat texture with barely anything on it. Try that first, right? So you would probably make that with like Substance Designer. That's probably the easiest way to set something like that up. What you could potentially look into, I'm not sure how this is going to look with this. I've never really tried it with like a paint peeling effect, but you could look into POM, which is parallax occlusion mapping. That's a technique to fake depth in your textures. Right, so I would start with a base texture that just has like the stereotypical base color, roughness, normal, all that kind of stuff. And then, because you're going to be building a height map in Substance Designer anyway, you can then use that height map to feed into POM, which in Unreal Engine, it's just literally a node in your material editor that is called parallax occlusion mapping. And it accepts like a height map input and like a bunch of other stuff. But it's pretty simple to set up, especially if you're just talking about like one tileable and that's it. So that could be like an interesting thing to look into. Again, I'm not really sure how that's going to work with this because usually POM is very effective at details that are inset, but not necessarily coming out of it, right? So I'm 50-50 on this technique to work. It again depends on like how thick you want it to be, right? Because everything kind of depends on the thickness. Because for a lot of it, you can honestly just get away with just like the base, right? So the hierarchy would be something like you got your base texture. This is the way that I would approach it. Got your base texture. Cool. If that doesn't work, then we can start looking into POM. If that doesn't work for the visuals that you want to go for, then you need to add actual geometry. But that is going to become tricky to set up and also complex in the way that you have to create it as well, right? So I would probably not add this here. This is like the final step if you want to get like really up close and personal with things or like a really detailed shot. But you're never going to see this in, well, never say never, but it's very unlikely that you're gonna see that with geometry. But that you're gonna see that in the game, sorry. Like the application of geometry. But yeah, that would be like the final step that you could take. But usually you don't need that. It's almost like, it's like a warning sign, right? That's like the last step that you could take, but I would not recommend that. Would a decal also help as an alternative method? You could potentially use a decal. Yeah. You could have a decal that kind of does the same effect. Again, it just depends on how detailed and how deep you want the effect to be, right? Because if you have an effect, let's say you just have like a generic paint peeling effect that does like the whole look, and then you just have like a tileable that's basically just like a patch of this, right? So this section here would be the decal. That could also work. But the reason why I don't necessarily like this, and I prefer working with like multiple tileables instead, is that it gives you more flexibility, especially when it comes to bigger surfaces, right? That's the way that I look at it. Where like a decal is good if you want to get like specific details in certain areas, but it's not good at like dressing like, let's say, a whole corridor, right? So you can actually use them in combination as well, where at a certain point you could say like, okay, I have like two tileable textures that I'm blending between with vertex paint, but I then also have a decal that I use in like specific cases, right? So you can kind of use them, like blend them all together. Wouldn't anchor points work for painting the peeling effect in Substance Painter? Oh yeah. There's like tons of things that you can do with like anchor points as well. But I prefer to do, because the way that you're talking about it is you already have your tileable setup, your tileable materials set up that you then apply in Substance Painter, where I would honestly apply the materials directly in Unreal instead, and then just do like my vertex painting and all that kind of stuff. Can they use a mesh decal if they want a thicker result? Yeah. That would be an interesting option as well. That could be actually a good option if you want certain areas to stand out, because again, what you do a lot in games is you don't want to have a lot of detail necessarily. You want to give the effect of a lot of detail, right? And the difference there is that if you have a decal that has like actual geometry, like peeling off the walls, but the rest of the wall is relatively flat, then people are going to be convinced that the rest of the wall is actually more detailed because of that single decal that you put on top of it, right? So that could be, there's so many ways of doing game art. I think there's a lot of good opinions and good workflows in the chat as well. So there's like lots of things that you can like combine. It mostly depends on like how close you're going to get, right? Like distance to the camera is always a very important one. And also how confident you are with your current skill set, right? Especially for beginners, I would honestly keep it like really simple. Have two tileables, one that is just like this generic like flaky paint, and then have one that is more like peeling, right? It has like bigger patches of peel, and then blend between the two. Blockouts looking solid on this. Funnily enough, I've been bumped into a similar struggle with peeling chip-in look right now. Useful to hear about. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think this is one of those common things because a lot of people love to do like abandoned places. But this stuff is actually what makes them really tricky, right? Because there's lots of texture detail in those sort of environments. But yeah, that was the question that Vicki had. So hopefully that is helpful. And like Ryan said, solid looking block out for now. I'm curious to see what you're going to do with it in the future. Yeah. And let's see. And then let's see if we have like a... Oh, this one is empty. I still need to add images to these guys. Let's see. So we got Luke over here. Luke didn't have any questions. This is one of those cases where if you don't ask any questions, I'm not going to give you feedback, right? I'm just going to say that this update is looking good. Pretty good looking update. And yeah, looking forward to what you're going to do with it in the future, Luke. But for next time, always feel free to ask questions, because now we just have like a WIP Wednesday tag, but there's nothing that I can really look at, right? It's more just like a progress update in this case. Still nice to see. Not necessarily for updates, for feedback though. So yeah, good stuff. For people that are in the community, go check out all the people's work as well. It's always nice to see people supporting each other. It's gonna be awesome. But yeah, nice little update, Luke. Let me actually add these images here in here as well. Where is Thomas's work? Did I not download that? Uh-oh. Let's see. Sorry for this brief interruption. So we got Thomas here. Yeah. Oh. I see what happened. Fair enough. Just gonna get these two images. Slap them in really quickly. Cool. Okay. And we're moving on. So I think the next one we're going to have a look at is Moonlight. Let's have a look-see here. I think there was only one question this time around from Moonlight. When you're sculpting a prop, when do you decide that the poly count is too big? So when you're sculpting a prop, like you're doing the high poly, right? The poly count doesn't really matter because you're going to bake all that detail down onto your low poly anyway. So when you're doing the high poly pass, the only thing that you need to keep in mind is just your performance and if you actually need the geometry, right? But if your computer can handle freaking anything that you like throw at it, then it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter like how many polygons you're gonna do, because the most important thing is the high poly, the low poly when it comes to it, because that is the thing that's actually gonna end up in the game. The high poly, you're never gonna see that. So if you're doing the high poly, geo in general doesn't matter. If you want to have some sort of rule to stick by, like, you would kind of need to have, well, if we want to get really technical, the thing that you're trying to look out for in terms of like your high poly is, because what we want to do is we want to bake that with the high poly details down onto the low poly, right? What is going to be the important factor here is how big your textures are going to be, right? So if we're going to go like the more technical route, you need to know how big your texture is going to be and roughly what the size of the pixels is going to be compared to like your UVs. And that will give you an idea on how big or how detailed you can go in like sculpting. I've never thought about it that way. I just, when it looks good and it doesn't look like blocky or pixelated, right? When you're looking at the whole prop by itself, I would kind of keep this as like a general rule in mind. But if you're like all the way zoomed in and you're focused on like a small section and you're trying to add more geometry just for this small texture, that's a bridge too far, right? So or maybe a better way of looking at this is the camera that you're going to be using in your environment at the end, right? For the final presentation. try to sort of get towards that distance, and if the high poly doesn't look like pixelated or blocky, like we said before, then you're in a good position. The camera position for the presentation matters a lot. The sculpt on this one is looking nice, though. I've been reading through your thread a little bit, right? And these are like some different iterations when it comes to the actual approaches on how detailed or how stylized you need to go. And yeah. The final presentation, yes, that is a good question. I don't know. So that is actually like way more important than you might realize at this point, because that is like a huge potential time saver. Because if you know what kind of distance you're going to be looking at it from like the final presentation, then we also know how detailed or how in depth we need to go when it comes to sculpting those individual things, right? For example, there are people out there that make like a full environment and they get overwhelmed because they treat their full environment as like, oh, I make like every individual prop as good as a hero prop. But that is never going to work, right? So the same can be applied there, where like you just focus on the stuff that's important and then you try to cut corners on like the rest of your environment, like using titleables, trim sheets, all that kind of stuff, right? Because not everything needs to be as detailed as a hero prop, right? Same thing here. Just the camera distance to your object for the final presentation is gonna be what you're looking for. I think this is actually like a good representation. If you can't see like anything wrong or anything blurry or blocky on this one, then you're good. That's the way that I would see it. Because this is generally like a good distance that is going to be likely to be used for like your final presentation. One of the bigger mistakes I made was in the past is not keeping the silhouette of the high poly in mind when creating the low poly version. Yeah, that is one of those things where you're just gonna have to run into that wall and you're gonna be able to adjust it, right? That is like a very common thing. I did the same thing. A bunch of people that I know did the same thing. And usually what happens is because the low poly version, we're always trying to keep in mind, like we're trying to keep it very technical, right? But when it comes to the high poly creation, like we let the artist come out more. So usually we're like a little bit more free with how we interpret the prop and how much detail or damage that we add to it. And then we have to go back into just a low poly version. So I don't think that that's like necessarily a bad thing. Because otherwise, the other option would be is that you make a low poly that is going to become very restrictive, and you don't necessarily want that either, right? There's so many ways of getting around that stuff now, and that's also where like experience comes in, right? For a good chunk of it, where you can just be like, oh, the last couple of props that I did, I ended up adding some cuts here and there because I wanted to add some damage. I'm just going to do that now already. Or if you know that you're going to be doing something really organic, just start with the high poly, right? Instead of doing the low poly first. Yeah. There's so many ways. Hey, Michael. Welcome. Good to see you. Many good questions here. Always. People are always good at asking questions. Cool. Thank you so much for presenting your work, Moonlight. Awesome to see your updates. Let's see. Let me organize these images as well. There's a whole bunch of them. I don't know how relevant they are going to be for the questions, but let me just lay them out really quick. Oh, another sneaky one. Let's do it like that then. It's not going to be perfect. Cool. Let's have a look. We're jumping all over the place. So next one, Dition. Thank you for your advices. Happy to help. So, Dition is working on this cool samurai sword. Let's have a look. It's a katana. So far, a few questions. According to the references, there are repeating details in the guard. So you got like these bits of flowers, right? That's what we're talking about here. I will do them as a stamp in Substance Designer. Oh, in Substance Designer. Okay. I just read that and I assumed Substance Painter. Whatever. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever you're more comfortable in. But how frowned upon is it to differ from the reference or the concept by adding other details instead? There is so much empty space left in the guard that I like to fill it with more details. So this is one of those things where it's not necessary to add more details, right? The beauty of this comes from the elegance of the delicate balance of all the things there. So actually having areas of rest versus detail is actually a benefit. It's not a bad thing. That being said, if you want to change things up, I've always started from a concept and I've made it my own, right? And at a certain point, that concept is going to start looking more like an inspiration rather than a concept. Where that line lies and how you interpret that is pretty loose, but in general, like, yeah, you can do whatever you want with it, right? It's your art. If you start from a concept though, same thing applies, right? Just give them a shout out, tell them that they're like the start or that you use them as a concept. That's all good. That is all good. But yeah, that's the way that I would approach it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you, so one important thing here though is what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to make it an improvement. Because if you are gonna change a core thing about the design, the look, the art, or whatever, if it's not an improvement, or if it's not in some way like uniquely yours or whatever, like, then you open yourself up for scrutiny, right? Because people can see that, like, okay, you started from this concept, but then you took like, just saying in general, right? You took like this weird direction and you've made it worse than the actual concept is. And that kind of can give you like an insight if people realize what the concept was about or not, right? And if you don't understand like the concept fundamentally and then you build your art upon that, that's where it goes wrong. And that's where you have some weird interpretations of like the source material, right? So yeah, number 2 is the hilt weaving in 3D turned out to be quite a challenge. Oh yeah, it is. I want to have the option to making use of palm for the hairs. For the hairs? Oh, I don't think I have the image for that then. Let me have a look. Oh, so for this stuff. Yeah, the individual things here, you don't need palm for that. Like, I would honestly not use palm. I would try to like add a little bit more of an emphasis on like the silhouette, right? So that you have it coming out a little bit and have like a bigger emphasis on that instead. And potentially not use palm. I think for this kind of very shallow pattern, you don't need palm. You can just get away with normal map. Normal map is very powerful. Like, this is going to be more than enough with just a stereotypical like old school approach. Yep, exactly. Normals, you can just use like the old school approach here. No need to do anything fancy. Even for 5cm close-up shots, yeah. Yeah, for a pattern like this, I don't think you're gonna need it. But I will say, if I don't know, I don't think you need it, right? I just want to like put an emphasis on that. But if you are at some point like, hey, I still feel like it's a little bit flat, adding POM to the mix is not that big of a deal, right? That's pretty easy to set up. It's highly likely that you have the input map, like the height map anyway. So at that point, like, yeah, it's easy to set that up. Let's see, was that everything? Would you I want to have the option of making use of POM for the hairs, but also being able to sculpt edit the weaving a bit for a more organic look. Would you just manually weave the mesh around and array duplicate, or is there a more elegant way? For stuff like this, I think having like a more manual approach is going to give you like a better end result, right? So I think you can use like an array duplicate like method, right? But then you will still have to go in and like make sure that you make it work in like a manual manner, right? Because that is actually where you want to have like slight variations between things here, right? Where it's not 100% perfect. You kind of want to have that little bit of like an organic nature into like how it folds, when it starts to fold, and how thick some of the folds are. You kind of want to have like a little bit of variation in there. So you can kind of see that like, because from this distance, what we're trying to do is you can see this highlight. This highlight is not perfect across the board, right? And that's the sort of effect that you're probably gonna have to mimic when it comes to just slight variations in your geometry, right? To slightly adjust that highlight. I think for most of the things that I ever do is you can get pretty far with modifiers or non-destructive matters, right? But if you really want to get that personal touch in there, you have to do some manual work. So nothing bad about manually doing it. Feels so inefficient. Well, you're still doing it with like a modifier though, right? You're still making an array. You're still doing it like pretty quickly. It's just like manually just adding that little bit of character in there that you need is the important part, right? I would honestly stop thinking about like, oh, it feels so inefficient. Is this good for a job? I would honestly kind of just like leave that out. And I would focus on what gives me the best end result. If you have to do some stuff manually, then that's the way to do it, right? That's the way that I would approach it. Because whenever it comes to actual workflows or how you need to do stuff on the job, you're gonna learn that on the job. So yeah, that's the way that I would do it. So modifiers at first, and then I would just go in and just do like manual adjustments. You could like, you can make this like fully non-destructive, right? You can if you wanted to, but then it's always a question of like, at a certain point, you're gonna be spending so much time on making it in such a non-destructive way that it's way easier to do it just by hand, right? You're gonna encounter that a lot as well. I thought they expect you to know. No, like, very simple. What it comes down to it is they want to see you make like really cool looking game art, right? The actual workflows and all that stuff behind it, they don't necessarily care. Like, yeah, it needs to be done in a certain program, and maybe if you do it in like a very unique way, that might be like a way to stand out from the crowd. But what you will see most of it is the people that will get picked up by studios are the people that are doing what they love and they're executing well on it. within game art, right? Those are the people that are getting picked up. Let's see. And then we have number 3. Any advice on the presentation without blowing up the scope, but not being too neutral? The ground all I have now is a clear no-no. I agree. I didn't add the ground to it either. I'm just gonna say story. Right? Come up with some sort of story. Again, this doesn't need to be complex, right? What you could do is you could just have this sword on a pillow or something like that, and the pillow can be mega scans, right? It could be as simple as that. It could be an altar where you don't even need to make the altar, right? It could be just like a marble texture that is presented where it's presented on maybe like, I don't know, like a little bit of fabric on top of it as well. Again, just mega scan stuff, right? That's why I'm saying focus on the story. Like, what is it you want to tell? Because there's so many ways that you can present this that is like pretty cheap to do it, right? So focus on the story, figure out what you want to tell. If you want to do something like this, that could be awesome, right? In this case, I think Justin brought it up as well. You just need to make fine tune it a little bit so that it stands out, right? I know that this is like very WIP, but yeah, it can be something like this. It can be something completely different, right? For example, got some good stuff here, right? Like this could be cool. Like honestly, just like taking this as a presentation by itself, you have to kind of do a little bit of searching what is actually on the papers, right? Because for all you know, it might be something that is not relevant to the story that you want to bring, so you have to dive into it a little bit. But the story is still what's going to give it its substance, right? Be sure to have fun when doing portfolio projects, otherwise it will wear off pretty easily. Yeah. So no need to build a scene around it. Well, a scene always sounds so daunting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Right? You don't need to make it like a full scene. You could just make it like a thing that you grab from Megascans to just present a prop, right? And that could technically be a scene as well. So there's no need to make like a full scene. You can just do like a little presentation, like pedestal or whatever, right? So many ways of playing it. We talked about it yesterday, like quite a few times as well in the portfolio reviews. Just in terms of like presenting your work, it doesn't take too long, right? Because for me, when it feels like when it's a scene, it always has to have some sort of edge or end. Oh yeah, it does. And the edge is called the camera. Right? So just think about it in that way. Because what happens outside the camera? No one knows. You know? I don't have like I don't know, like a camera screenshot lying around from like my my factory piece that I did like so many years back now. But like it looked really nice. But if you just like zoom out the camera, everything just falls apart. But that's fine, right? Because it serves that purpose. Like I've only built it within that camera view and the rest of it doesn't exist. Because again, it's more about the perception of it being a world that it has to be a world, right? Cool. Let's have a look at who we have next then. But yeah, keep up the good work. Keep up the good work, Coffee. Let's have a look. Who is up next? I have noticed the simpler you go, the more elegant it can look as well. I had to change my mindset on that because I just added pressure onto myself. Yeah, exactly. Especially in this case, when you're just trying to present a single asset, there's no need to make a scene for it, right? But you can just do like a really effective way of just, hey, I'm not going to build a whole scene. That's fine. But I am going to add like stuff to it though. Oh God. Are we still there? My PC just fucking glitched out. Oh God, I think we're still live though. Oh my God. So let's have a look. For example, this, right? First thing that I came across, like just having like Megascan's box or whatever below it with like a little bit of fabric. In this case, works fine, right? We're like looking at like a scope in someone's shed. Doesn't need anything more, right? It can be pretty easy. Or it can be pretty straightforward. You're live. Thanks, Luke. I'll think about something, just don't want to spend weeks just for the scene. No, neither should you, right? Especially for something that's just a prop, right? But you do want to spend a little bit of time focusing on the presentation though, because the difference between what we just looked at and just having like a black background is huge, right? One tells a story where another one is just like, hey, we're looking at a prop. Ryan is saying, yep, if you look like 10 degrees in any direction from the end of the hall of my scene, you start seeing cubes with grids on them. Yeah, exactly. And this happens in games a lot as well, right? Like, we only build the stuff that you can see, and then we try to cover up the majority of the stuff that you can't see, right? We try to fake it as much as we can. But yeah. I feel that I've been building an entire playable level, and it's been a lot. I've reduced down to a single room. I figured I can showcase as many skills within that lower scope scene. Oh yeah. I've said this a ton before, right? But like the main difference that you're showing off between a big scene and a small scene is that you can endure the length of a project, right? Because look at the games industry, right? If we want to make bigger worlds, what do? Right? We hire more people. So there's going to be more people on the project. So don't put like these unrealistic like expectations of having to build like, I don't know, a section of an open world just by yourself, right? Because that changes it from like, hey, I have my specialization to, oh, I need to have all the things that I can do. Worst case scenario, right? You don't want to be in that position. You want to set yourself up to win, not to fail, right? All right, let's keep it moving on. So we got Darkon next. Darkon is working on the Dune 2 project. Here's my week's update so far. Some questions for this week check-in. Is there anything that I can improve upon texture-wise and lighting-wise? So when it comes to lighting, I'm not too sure because the angles that we're looking at, they're not that interesting to look at necessarily, right? And I've only taken like a sample, right? But it was more to showcase like the actual texture work rather than anything else, right? I do like all the stuff that you added though. Like this is starting to feel like really nice. So did a good job on that. Like now it starts to feel like really, really interesting. What you are going to run into in this scene though is the scene itself is always going to be boring because there's not much going on in the scene, right? And this is just like a straight up observation of the source material, right? Not your interpretation of it. So it's always going to be really difficult to make something like this look really, really interesting. And for that, you will have to look at all the details, right? So if we go back to the source material, for example, what I'm missing is you have these like slight breakups here that are not visible on like your end, and they probably serve like the purpose of giving extra volume to the space and also breaking it up a little bit as well, right? It is a very safe environment, not too ambitious. I think honestly this one might be like, I don't want to say, the only way that I can really say it is not, it's too safe at this point. Because what is going to happen with something like this, and we discussed this like in the past couple of weeks, right? The focus is all going to be on the texture work, not necessarily on anything else. But there's only so much that you can do with the texture work here, right? So it's a difficult choice. It's almost like, what would be an interesting example? So for example, you're like an industrial designer, and you are tasked with making a sleeker version of an Apple laptop. Right? That's like very difficult to just execute on. Because it is by itself already such like a sleek product, right? But yeah, let's have a look at it again. So I like what you're doing. I like the additional details that you added. I think some of those separations, right, that we were just looking at could be very interesting to kind of break up like the long strips of light. So just having like a couple of sections where it kind of looks, let's have a look. Where were we? I don't know how this was built, but what I'm kind of seeing is that it almost looks like, if we were to look at it from like a top-down perspective, right? Let's say you have like one of the curved walls, right? And we're looking at it from like top down. What seems to be happening is that the wall is like braced in at like multiple sections to like support it, right? And that's what's creating those separations. And I'm assuming that those lights are going to be in here, and that's what creates like this flood of light coming in, right? But those like separations can actually be like pretty interesting to include, because it does like a little bit to add detail to like the whole space. Important to note, they don't run all the way up until the end, right? So you kind of want to leave like a little bit of space there as well. I see a strong taste for a specific environment. I do agree. Yeah. There's not much to go on for sure. I think that's what makes it so difficult, right? Because it's all in like the subtlety and like the attention to detail. Minimalist environment can give a strong aesthetic experience. It can, yeah. But I would argue that in most games, we're not really designing those spaces for the same effect, right? Like those kind of spaces, I'm kind of imagining that it's almost like a live art exhibition. There's like a load of interesting spaces that do like these audio visual experiences where you can just chill out on chairs, and like there's like huge spheres in like different colors like moving in like this large warehouse. That's interesting because you are a part of the experience, right? It's difficult to then convey something like this in like a video game, right? Because we have to like purposely gamify most of it. Again, I'm just like explaining this stuff, right? This is not like a knock on like your approach and like your your skill set here. But yeah, let's see what else is there we can have a look at. I want to publish this piece as I want to polish this piece, important distinction there, as much as possible before I can publish this on ArtStation. I think if you want to spend your time, it's really looking at the details, right? Like you said, polishing it up. The details can be that. And then most of the details would also just be like more textures, more texture details, right? Stuff that you're doing here already is looking really nice. I really like the surface here, right? This surface feels really nice already. You kind of have to look at the same approach on like the walls and so those elements as well, where this is again like really different, right? Because you kind of want to have some sort of like indication that like people bumped into them or something like that. And especially trying to get rid of as much as these sharp edges as possible, right? Because this visible geometry is really visible at the moment, and that's something that you can just smooth up a lot, right? So those kind of things, making all the surfaces feel like nice and smooth, making sure that like all the textures feel like really what's the best way of saying that? You can almost taste the textures, right? That's usually how people refer to that. But yeah, overall, big fan of what you did with like the main stuff though. And is there anything else I'm missing I might not be seeing? What are the things I can do to take this to the next level? Is there anything that I'm doing right regards to overall scene itself? Yeah, so what you're doing right is definitely the texturing, right? Like you leveled that up massively from the beginning. I think what you want to look into now is pick your camera angles. Oh, that's actually a good point, Luke. We didn't really talk about the water because the water is gonna need a lot of work. For example, here, the water doesn't look too great at the moment, right? If you want to make this, if this is going to be a part of your scene, the water needs to look like really nice because that's where a lot of attention is going to be drawn towards, right? And I think what could be really cool is something like this, right? Where you have dirt specks and just like this oily kind of streak like going into like the water itself, right? And have like a slight normal map that just like distorts the reflections just a little bit, right? But it is so hard to in water. Yep, it is. But again, it's one of those things where, especially with this environment, the focus is gonna be on the water. And water is super hard to do. So I would potentially look into Marketplace assets. Look if they have like good water available. It doesn't have to be dynamic. It just has to be like a nice shader that you can just like plonk in and then just build on top of, right? That's what you're really looking for. But if you want to do it justice, I think the water is going to require like the most amount of work in this scene. So yeah, let me write that down as like 0.3. But what I was saying before is that I would advise you to pick your camera angles. And then also try to do like a little bit of post-processing as well. To see what the final effect is going to be if you do like all your post-processing, if you have like a nice frame setup, all that kind of stuff. And start thinking about like how many images you need to do like the final presentation on your portfolio. I think this is a good time to kind of get like an early idea of what you want to do with that as well. Could we do smoke or wet footprints or something to imply one was just using the room? Just throwing ideas at the wall. I think that's actually a pretty interesting idea, Luke. Maybe yeah, you could do like a water trail or something like that. Just like a couple of drips somewhere, right? Just implying that people are just out of the room or something like that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you everyone for the feedback. Yeah, like I was saying before, like the floor itself looks good, and this is a really tricky one to give feedback on as well, because it comes down to like all those details too. But best of luck, Darkon. Best of luck. And then yeah, looking forward to seeing more updates as well. That could be an interesting idea. Yeah, like it was just used. Could be interesting. Let's see. Let me do like a quick scroll here. I think Giovani is also going to be like pretty quick, or am I on it? Let's see. Giovani, welcome. Good to see an update to your scene. Let me have a look at the questions. So, what do you think of the changes? Also, what do you think of the defenses that I added? Do they fit the theme? They fit the theme, but considering that this is an isolated place, I'm not sure that it makes sense. Interesting. Yeah. Let's have a look at it. First thing that stands out to me is the car versus the person. I feel like there's like a, or maybe it's a perspective, but it feels like the car is off in terms of like scale. Like the height of the character feels like twice the height of the car, right? Even with the perspective like in mind as well. But in terms of the actual theme, it is really weird that you have like this massive build-up space in like the middle of the mountains though, because it doesn't really feel like they can bring so much stuff up, especially because this is like a forest ranger cabin, right? And most of them that have like a dedicated cabin, again, not an American or Canadian, so I got no clue what I'm saying here. But it feels like you can only reach them by like walking to them, right? And maybe that could be like something really cool to play into instead of trying to make it like something like really huge and big. It could be actually be quite interesting to have, to imagine this is just like one person or like a couple or something like that that made this into their base, and you make it something like, I don't know, a bit more condensed. Again, I'm not opposed to the whole idea, right? Like that is honestly up to you, right? But if you're like, no, I want to make it bigger, I feel like we're going into like, I don't know, subjective stuff at this point. Yeah. Considering that this is an isolated place, I'm not sure if they make much sense. What do you say? Yeah, I think I'm also thinking about like other people's places, right? Or like other people's pieces that they made. And we have a person that did like a workshop for us called Netraraj, and his piece did kind of something similar, right? It was like a big fenced off area, and then people were building inside of it too. So it's kind of giving me those vibes as well. Okay, so I'm gonna take a different approach. I think when it comes to the defenses, what I would try to do is try to make it more out of natural resources rather than having this like very militarized feel, right? Especially the fence is just really throwing me off. Maybe you could do with something like the sandbag still, but it would honestly be like pretty interesting to have a place that is like almost built out of like boulders, right? And then they have like, I don't know, some sort of like wooden fortification with like just stuff that they found lying around, like dead branches, big MDF plates, and then like a couple of branches again. Just to stick with the whole theme of like the isolation, right? And then you're gonna add like a more organic feel to the whole thing. We have fairly huge structures like restaurants, etc., on top of big mountains here in Canada. They use cable cars to move everything up. Yeah, so like that could actually be an interesting way with the cable car. That could be pretty interesting. That would also be like pretty unique as well, where they like have like a cable car that's like rigged up to like a diesel generator or something like that, and that's the only way in, and it would provide like the perfect defense as well, right? Yeah. It could be cool. My idea was to actually make it look big in a way that shows that they've been there for a while. Yeah, that's cool. And I think that's kind of getting there, right? It comes down to when making it feel big. It comes down to the facilities. That's the word that I was looking at. It comes down to facilities, right? And what I mean with that is that the amount of facilities that you're going to have, so the amount of room that you're going to have for people to sleep, the amount of water storage that they have, the amount of food growing that they do, like all those things that are like crucial to like human survival. If you start dipping into those, then we're getting something that can then also give the appeal or like the visuals to support more people, right? Because right now we have like a dining area or something like that, dining area / workshop, but I'm still not sure where they're like getting the food from. How are they collecting the rain? Are they collecting the rain for water? All that kind of stuff, right? So the question then becomes like, how do they sustain themselves, right? Because how well they can sustain themselves has a lot to do with how many people there are, right? Because, for example, we're living in like an isolated place, so they have to probably look outside of their own defenses, and they have to probably scavenge like quite far out now at this point, right? So that is all going to impact like how many people that can be there. So that has to do with like how they can sustain themselves, and then how better they can sustain themselves, how many more people can live on this base, right? And then also think about like the facilities, right? I like that you got a toilet here. That's awesome. What else do people need, right? Are they training like their kids to go out hunting? So maybe they have like a quickly set up like archery range or something like that, right? Where you can see like people are just like shooting arrows into it. Because that's like a sustainable way of hunting, right? Instead of like having bullets, they probably ran out at this point, potentially. What else can be here? So maybe, I don't know, it's high up on a mountain, but I'm imagining like a farm to be up here, right? Where they're doing like a little bit of like work themselves, and you can have like a little shed right next to it. where like people can sit in the shade, or like the farm is just looking out. You kind of have like a lookout tower at the same point as well. And then we kind of have like this section over here where you could potentially also have, I don't know, some kind of a lookout tower that they just like hastily built themselves. Like I'm honestly thinking about like those forest ranger huts that you see sometimes in the forest, where they can just like basically build it themselves as well, right? That they have like a little bit of a defense buildup. And those are like kind of the things that needs fleshing out, right? Where we can go into this like a lot, but it basically comes down to asking the question of how did they get their food? How did they get their water? What kind of situation are they in? And how many people live there, right? Based on like the previous things. Yeah. Let's see. Luke was saying, I think creating variations in how your defenses were set up, like Tim was saying, some boulders, some sandbags, some sticks, implies visually that they were made over time. I think so too. Yeah, you can really play into that effect as well, because if we're gonna go with this look, right, where you have like barbed wire fences, sandbags, all that kind of stuff, that hints to me that this is like a military operation, right? But that's probably, or maybe if that's what you want to go for, this is the look to have, right? But if it's not, then you kind of want to go for something that is a little bit more organic and less fleshed out than this is. Solid updates already picturing sick tire tracks, warm gravel. Yeah, should be a lot of fun. This is fun to play around with, right? But this is also where the difficulty comes in of like, now you have to actually design the space as if like people were living there, right? So you gotta dig into like, okay, what do people need and all that kind of stuff. And that is not easy, right? I love it. For me, this stuff is like very fulfilling, right? I could keep talking about it for like hours and hours if I wanted to, and really flesh out like the different aspects of the base, right? And try to make it more unique. But yeah. Have a look at that. Thank you so much for the update, Giovani. I'm looking forward to seeing this come together though. Like these kind of projects, they have a lot of potential, right? Because now you're carving out your own like little environment, right? So yeah, it is very ambitious. Very ambitious. So I would probably consider at some point, you're gonna run into this point guaranteed, using asset packages or something like that. For like lots of stuff that you can just scatter around for like generic props, right? And then you can just focus on like the most important stuff. Yeah. Thank you so much for the update, Giovani. Best of luck. Let's go over to Justin. I wanted to get some feedback towards my main asset sculpt and the low poly mesh that I will bake the high over onto. My main question is for the low poly. As props are not something I generally focus on, I decided not to utopo this mesh and went straight onto UV mapping after decimating it. My reason for this is because I wanted to preserve all the bumps and dents across the surface so that my asset silhouette doesn't look clean and straight. Is this a reasonable approach towards my main asset or for the level? It is. It is. I think as long as you have a reasonable amount of geometry, I don't necessarily think that like the geometry flow and the topology matters too much, unless it is going to be something that's going to be animated, right? If you're going to animate something, then well, if you're going to animate something that is like soft body, right, and it has to like flex and move around, you want to have a lot of control about the topology that you're going to add. In this case, I don't think you need to, right? I think this is going to be very common, especially in games what I imagine like God of War, right? Sorry for the bad grammar. Oh no, don't worry about it. Do not worry about it. I mean, you've seen me try to write like silhouette like 1,000 times on the stream now, and I guess it's all different and all wrong anyway. So I can relate. I don't think you're overthinking it. I think this is really good actually. Just in terms of like the density that you're going for, pretty low, right? And I think this is going to give you like a nice result though. What you might run into, and what you have to consider at this point, is that this might not be the thing that you then want to show off on your portfolio necessarily. Because generally the way that the reason why you want to showcase like wireframes and all that kind of stuff is to showcase that we can actually do the retopologizing and all that kind of stuff, right? In this case, I would potentially think about like doing like a different prop, where you can actually just do like the retopology, right? But thing is, there's always a part of me though that feels like this is like pretty outdated advice. I mean, you still need to know your topology, right? You still need to know how to like optimize it and like do your retopology. But if you're doing like very organic assets like these ones, for example, like retopology is like a step, like not a step that you would generally do. So I would say retopology, like retopologize like another prop that makes sense, right? So that's what I'm trying to say here. Oh, you've done it already? Yeah. Okay, that's good then. Lastly, do you have any warnings or advice you can give when it comes to texturing very large props in Painter? It's a big asset, so I'll probably have to group it into separate parts with separate material ideas before exporting. That depends on the amount of textures that you are going to use, right? Because this is big. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just having a look at like all the different aspects of it. It is a big asset. What I will say is you need to figure out like how to break this up. How are you going to do that, right? Because what you're probably going to have to do is you're going to... But this would be the way that I would do it. Like the bell itself, try to keep that as much as you can just as like a single group, and then just do the rest of it on like a single texture or something like that, right? So you would just have like 2 different textures here, where because of the size of the bell itself, depending on your texel density, that might become like a 4K or something like that, you know, because you want to make that look good. So I think if you want to spend more texture space, this is the place to do it. Where ideally something like this can be just like a 2K or something like that. This all depends on your texel density, right? I would not go higher than 4K. If you want to go higher than 4K, or if you think you need to, then you're gonna have to find a different way of working, or like a different approach on texturing, right? You might have to split it up. You might have to symmetry it, where like the front and the back are just symmetried, because honestly, from what I can tell, is that there's not much difference in the approach on the bell itself, right? Especially looking at like the textured version, which I didn't download for some reason. There's nothing to me that really screams like, oh my god, we can't have that unique detail like show up twice, right? That's not the case that I'm seeing here. So you could get away with like symmetrying it if you want to save out like a ton of space. Yeah. That's always an option. So that would be like one 2K and then one 4K map. And then if you need to, you can always symmetry. Especially on the bell, right? But yeah. Just make it look good. Make it look good, make it look snazzy. But yeah, otherwise this is looking good. Looking quite nice. If we're gonna get like really picky on it, if I'm gonna get really picky, right? So let's dive into that a bit, because one of the reasons why you mentioned that you didn't retopologize this asset is because you have like a lot of dents and like a lot of stuff that break up the silhouette nicely, right? I have to disagree with that though. If you actually look at the silhouette, there's not too much here that breaks up the silhouette in like a very very distinguishable way, right? What I thought that you meant is something like, oh, I want to have like, let's say like a freaking crack in here, right? And then you have like, I don't know, like just layers and layers of like rust on top of it as well. Yeah, at that point, I can kind of see it. Like, this is one of those weird cases where I can easily see this be like really easy to like retopologize. And you're probably not going to lose that much of the surface area, right? Because for example, the silhouette here, I actually wonder if I can do this. I guess we can just do it like a selection, right? It's not perfect. It like deviates a little bit, right? But for the most part, it's pretty close. So I don't think that you've done so much to differentiate on the silhouette that it's actually worth having like all the decimated things, right? So that means either you retopologize it, right? And you kind of keep it like this, or you emphasize the silhouette of like the low poly bell more than it currently is doing. That's the way that I would look at it. That would be like number 3. So and I would see, here we go, silhouette, probably misspelled that again. Or retopologize. I would say if I have to give you a choice, I would honestly do the first one. I would honestly do this one above retopologizing because it is your hero piece, right? So it's better to spend like a much more time and like really making it like, especially the details on top of it, right? Like really emphasizing those details. Let me look at the sculpt again. kind of hoping it to be like more ornamental. Where so what I was assuming is that you have like these guys over here. Oh. These guys over here, I was kind of imagining that they would like come out as well. Something like that, right? Where you get like a big change in the silhouette and then maybe this pattern comes out as well or something like that. Or just like doing a crack or something like that, right? So big silhouette changes. So I would definitely push the silhouette more than it currently is. Or I know it's like you've done the sculpt and all that kind of stuff already. If you're not going to push it more, I would definitely re-topologize it, because then it makes sense, right? The majority of the stuff that you have on here, and I know that I'm kind of coming back to what I was saying in the beginning, but the more that I looked at it, all the detail is pretty surface level. Right? So in that case, you could just make it like pretty low in that case. Yeah, so I'm backtracking a little bit here, just making sure. But yeah, in terms of topology, it doesn't look too dense, right? It doesn't look too crazy. It's just that the topology doesn't justify the details that are on the belt right now. If I were to go for symmetry, would the patterns give it away that it's mirrored? Yeah, you would have to fix that, right? Like you would have to probably do some cleanup on like the cuts. What you could do, because it doesn't have to be like 100% symmetried, right? So let's say, I don't know, you just added like a cut down here. Right? So let's say this is like your seam for your UVs, right? It doesn't have to continue all the way across the bell though. Like you could say like, hey, up here, the pattern is not that noticeable, right? So that section is going to be symmetried. This section is not. And then the section below it is going to be symmetried again. Right? You could have this stuff is symmetried. As an example, right? It doesn't have to be exactly this way. But then you could have this as like unique in the middle. Let's see. I have like another color here. That could be an example, right? Symmetry doesn't have to be like across the whole board. It can just be like separate things and you're still saving like a massive amount. Like we're just doing like these two sections, right? You're kind of hiding the seam as well at the same time. So that's good. For photoscanned models, would a bell-like topology be suitable for a low-poly model to be used in an engine? For photoscanned models, would a bell-like topology be suitable for a low-poly model to be used in the engine? I am not too sure what you mean by that, Mike. Oh, let's say that this is like a photoscan model and then you just simplify it. Yeah. Like the more simple that you can make it without losing like any obvious silhouette details, like the better it is, right? Is it a good idea to have models that come from photoscanning in the portfolio? Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a very common technique now, especially for AAA games, so it can definitely only strengthen your portfolio. Definitely. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, Justin. I know we kind of flip-flopped a little bit on this one, but hey, that's the nature of being live. But yeah, overall though, like I've been kind of following your little thread, right? Like just seeing what you're up to, and it's really cool to see all the changes. It's really cool to see all the changes. So yeah, keep it up, man. Topo like the bell? Oh, okay. Yeah. I'll play around with the silhouette a bit more and get those patterns to stick out more. Looking into symmetry to save on some UV space. So the symmetry part is only if you require to, right? I think you will, But yeah, it depends on like the textile density that you want to go for, and if you need to save space, right? Because the limit is 4K. You can't really go higher than that. Before you either need to start symmetrying or splitting it up entirely. But if let's say as like a weird case, right? Let's take an extreme example. If you wanted to split that bell up into 2 4K maps, you better make it worth those texture maps. Like I want to see a lot of differentiation between the two, right? To make it really worth like that extra space, because a 4K map is huge, right? Cool. You can ring my bell. Exactly. Thomas, let's have a look at Thomas next. Thomas had a couple of questions. My workflow. So I think the workflow described here is what Thomas said before. So Thomas's workflow in general is pass number 1, create the buildings, the big elements. Pass number 2 is create the assets for the storytelling, and then the medium elements. And then pass 3 is create the detail assets and the small elements. I think that's generally like a good way of working. I would honestly figure out, or maybe like a slightly different way is, because the buildings in this one are relatively easy, right? It seems that you have like all the building blocks for them anyway. The way that I would approach this is my first focus would be, I would go in terms of like importance, right? Just to give a spoiler. Like what's important to the scene. So focal point would come first. Because right now you have a really cool looking scene, right? But I have no clue what we are supposed to focus on yet, right? Even though that's what we're going to be looking for in like a visual image, right? So first up, focal point, then the supporting assets, right? What supports the focal point and the story. Right, so supporting assets for the focal point and the story. And usually those things are like really closely tied together, right? Because your focal point is going to lean into the story a little bit as well. Let me see. For the story, the knights are back from the front, victorious, like the concept art. Okay. And in the foreground, we have some drinks. We have some food and drinks. And like the last plan is like a parade of knights with civils. Okay, so it's pretty much like this, right? What I want you to figure out then is, what are we going to be focusing on, right? In this frame, it's definitely going to be this knight in shining armor, right? And then the rest of it kind of plays like tribute to the whole city and the whole vibe, right? Because this knight is fighting for all of this, right? So if you want to do the same kind of setup, I want to see that immediately as well, because now you've kind of built like the skeleton of your scene, but you don't even know where the heart is gonna be, right? So try to figure it out first, because you've already like restricted yourself to like this kind of angle that you wanted to go for, even though it might not be the best angle that you would need for your focal point, right? And then lastly is just like, yeah, all the additional assets, right? Pretty general. So what that could be is the focal point is, let's have a look, right? So how are we going to do this? Let's see. So focal point is in green. So that's going to be space over here, probably, right? Because that's where you want people to look. Okay, how are we going to get people to look to it, and what is going to be there are very important questions there, right? Second is like supporting assets. we wanna make it feel like the people are celebrating, right? People are victorious. So how are we gonna do that? Maybe we have like a bunch of banners making them feel like, oh, it's a celebration of like the heroes returning back from the battlefield, right? A bunch of like these little celebratory like banisters. Right? So we have like all this cool stuff happening as well. And we could kind of use that to lead people as well. Because right now, we're kind of creating this zigzag pattern that kind of takes you to the focal point as well, right? So that could be like another thing where we can use leading lines to kind of lead you towards the stuff that you want to be looking at, right? You could have stuff down here, and then maybe this is kind of like forcing you to look down a little bit, right? Again, some awesome looking banners on the wall. Could be cool. So we've got the supporting assets, and then the additional assets, that is the stuff that you already kind of have, right? It's the houses, the other peasants. You wanted to have like a crowd drinking and all that kind of stuff, right? So all that kind of stuff is additional. So that's the way that I would work. Let's see. And so you kind of have like a big crowd that's probably just focusing on something here, right? But there's probably like people watching with their kids. Kind of want to have this open as well so that you can actually look at it. It's going to be really cool. People in the foreground as well. Right? But that's the way that I would focus on it now. It's in terms of like importance to the story. That's what I want you to focus on first. Because if you don't have a story, or if you don't have like a focal point that we're going to be drawn towards, then everything is up in the air, right? If you don't know where you want people to focus, then you kind of can look at it in this way, where if you don't have a focal point, the vision or the art doesn't have a goal, right? It doesn't have a destination to guide you towards. So figure that out first. And then my composition, that's also what you wanted to feedback on. I want to focus inside of the arch. I think I said my piece on that. It comes down to the same thing, right? I want you to focus on like a focal point. Give me like a story, put some stuff in place, and make sure that the light and like all the supporting elements kind of point you towards that, right? Right now, we don't have anything to look at yet. So you can say that, hey, I want to have the focus inside of the arch, but if there's nothing pulling us there, it doesn't matter, right? We're not, I mean, it's probably going to be obvious, but people that look at art, they're not going to look at your description first. They want to see stuff in the art. And if they don't understand anything, they'll probably read the description afterwards. But ideally, you should have none, right? So yeah, those are my 2 cents, Thomas. I just noticed that we also have like an older screenshot as well, so apologies for that. Because you've done like a bunch of updates in the meantime as well. Let me show it off. Gonna have like a ground floor and some other stuff going on in the foreground too. It's looking pretty nice. Yeah. I had the concept and the idea for the story. Any building progress is looking good. Oh, the building progress is looking good. Yeah. I'm really curious to see this come together as well. Got a really cool inspiration here. Just, yeah. Figure out the core of the scene first, because that's the most important part. All right. Let's have a look at Sheila next. I'm kind of doing it at random. So Looking for feedback mainly on the textures, but anything else as well. Everything is textured with tiles and trim sheets. Let's see. Let's have a look here. So Sheila is asking a couple of questions here. So first of all, feedback on the textures. Looking really nice so far. I don't really have too much to add here, honestly. Watching people working on whole environments is admirable. Yeah, it takes a long time to build up towards it though. But I love this too. Just, it has like a really nice soft feel to it already, which is what I kind of like. But yeah, I think the textures are in like a really good spot. I feel like some of like the blending is maybe like a little bit too harsh, right? Especially because I don't necessarily know where the sand is coming from. So it could be nice to have the sand like a little bit more contextual, where you have sand more build up here and then less sand building up here, right? Because the more you get into like the core of the building, the less sand gets blown into it, right? I'm assuming so. But other than that, I really got nothing to say about the textures. I think they look lovely. I love the little trim sheet with all like little details on it. And just like looking at the whole picture, I think it's going along really well. So the sand blowing in can be improved a little bit. Other than that, I think you're in like a really, really good spot. It's just, yeah, at this point, I feel like it's more about like what you're going to layer on top of it, right? And how you're going to do that additional layering potentially. But I think otherwise you're in a really good position. Oh. Well, if we're going to be really nitpicky, watch out for this seam over here though, because this seam really feels like a seam, right? Feels like some of the tiles are just like squished together a little bit. And then maybe, yeah, maybe now looking at the texture itself, I feel like varying up like the different sizes of the stones can help a lot as well, because it feels like a lot of them are just still a bit too aligned, right? That's about it. Thank you so much for subbing. I appreciate it. I should get like alerts because I have no idea what's happening now. Let me see. So let me add that as well. So oh, this is going to be nice. Tileability can be improved. Well, like, not even, I'm going to be a bit crass here, but looks too grid-like at this current iteration. Again, this is also just looking at it from that perspective, right? Because again, if we look at it in like the scene itself, it's still an issue, but I don't think it's too bad because you're doing like all the nice blending on top of it as well, right? But it's a detail. Okay, number 2. Let's have a look. Any tips on texturing those large curved shapes behind the temple? So because they're so far in the distance, I would probably make them out of like some pretty generic rock. And honestly do it in like a very mid-poly approach. where you just have like a tileable and you just do like your sculpted detail with like a normal map. It's almost like as if you were to approach like a rock face or something like that, where you're still baking down like a normal map that you could use. Oh, let me go back to it in a little bit, Sheila. But you're still baking down a normal map, but then the rest of it is just going to be textured with like a tileable texture. So you're still getting plus like a mid poly geometry, right? So you're not gonna make it full low poly, you're gonna add like a bit more to it. But yeah, that's the way that I would approach it. Very rock or cliff kind of workflow. That's the way that I would approach it. Not sure if I get it about the seam. It's not actually a seam, it's just the way that you laid out the texture kind of makes it feel like it is a seam, right? Because the way that this is just like aligned here is very seam-like. Even though looking at the whole texture now, it is not a seam, but it just feels like it because what you would expect. Right, so if we focus on this, is you would never expect like two bricks to be at like the same angle, right? But you have like the grouping happening here, where you have always like two bricks that are like just aligned with each other, right? And that really makes it feel like this is like a generated pattern rather than an organic pattern, right? I think that's what it comes down to. And that might be because you're probably using like I don't know what the name of it is, but like the tile sampler that you're using. There's one that kind of has this like very distinct pattern to it. That one is actually not too bad. Oh, the one you pointed out on the rendered scene. I thought it was the same texture though. Because I'm just looking at it now and that's like a different texture, right? I think in this one, it kind of suffers from... It's honestly not too bad. It's honestly not too bad as like this one over here. But it's just because most of the stuff here is relatively the same kind of shape, right? So it's pretty squarish overall. And again, there's not too much breakup in there either. But like I said, in the actual scene, it's not too bad actually. Or it's pretty good, I should say. Let's see. Also, do you think it's a good idea to expand the little scene to create what is behind the main view? Or can it be tricky without a concept? I was thinking about adding like an entrance with a big wooden door and reuse the assets for what I already have. It depends on how you want to expand it. I mean, you can, but you would have to make it consistent with the rest of the scene that you've already made, right? It could be cool. I would honestly keep that for like the last part, right? So that you have the scene already like in a really good place, and then you can be like, hey, I'm gonna just have some fun and see if this like door idea works out. Because if it doesn't, then you can just be like, okay, that didn't work out. I'm just gonna finish the scene and move on with my life, right? So I would honestly experiment with the scene at the end. That's what I would do. But yeah, really cool project. I'll give you a little heart here because I love it. It's no secret, right? Like, I've always been like a fan of your work as well. So keep on doing what you're doing, because it's really nice to look at as well. Yeah, really nice. I like the way that this is framed as well. It's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your work, Sheila. Couple more people. Just having a quick overview here. Okay. George Martinez. First of all, thank you so much for posting your work. This is the first time that you've posted as well. So welcome to the community. Great to see your work. I would love some advice on my overall scene, such as my modeling and general shapes, but especially on my lighting. I switched from Lumen to use baked lighting with light mass, and I felt that Lumen was too realistic for a stylized vibe I was going for. Oh. Although I don't know if I'm crazy and I'm just shooting myself in the foot by not using Lumen. Honestly, it's up to you. Like, I prefer using Lumen because it's just way easier to work with. And it's also like future proofing, right? Because a lot of companies now, they have some sort of like global illumination system set up like a Lumen. Very dynamic, very responsive. In certain ways, right? Not all of them do. But yeah. It is interesting though that you didn't prefer it, because I feel like a lot of the bounces and like all that stuff that you would get like on the fly would make it so much easier to work with. But hey, that's up to you, right? Like, if you feel comfortable working in it with this way, that's okay. So in terms of like Lumen or not, that's totally up to you. I've just always like despised like doing baked lighting, because you have to do like setup for it, right? Where Lumen is instant and like you can just change it on the fly. With baked lighting, you have to like wait for it to be done baking. Which is not a thing that I'm a fan of. But overall, modeling and general shapes, I think overall, pretty nice. Pretty cool, seeing all the little buildings. I think one of the things that that's interesting, that I'm probably gonna point out is that there's a lot of really straight lines, right? But there's like really interesting stuff like this rain pipe here that has like so much character. To be fair, the wall does a little bit as well. But like a lot of it still feels like it's pretty straight, right? Where you can really emphasize like the silhouettes of stuff like a little bit more. Like really break up like all the edges as well. But there's certain parts where it like works really well. For example, like the rain pipe. I think also the I forgot the name of these, but this guy over here looks really nice, where it has that like little bit of a sag to it. Like the roof has the same thing as well. Just, it's certain areas where you would expect it a little bit are kind of just missing it at the moment, right? So that's where you can do like some easy wins and just score like a few more points. Just a general rule really is nothing is straight. Right? And just apply that to everything that you have. Same for the railings as well. Just having like the occasional railing that's just like a little bit off kilter or something like that gives like a lot of character to a scene like this. Let's see. Modeling in general shapes, but especially my lighting. Yeah. Let's have a look at the modeling a bit more in depth. Nothing is straight. I knew it. I know. Like it is the biggest difference that you can make in especially for people that are like new to like making 3D. Like what makes stuff feel 3D is that they're just like really rigid in the way that they model, right? I'm not saying that's happening here, right? Because you're doing some really great adjustments in like a lot of places. But just in general, that's like a thing that people run into, where like if you keep everything like pretty straight, like that kills like any sort of character, right? I tried giving some curves to the buildings, but they start clipping into each other. Don't worry about it, right? Like when they start clipping into each other, you can't really see that anyway, right? And then for example, I don't know how you made the buildings, right? But I'm just having a look. I'm gonna assume that this guy over here, for example, is like unique, right? Nothing is stopping you from just having like a little bit of like a dent here and like a little bit of a dent here, and you're moving it like with the blue wall, right? And if you have like a little bit of clipping like inside of the buildings, oh, this is nice. Just also the way that it hits it as well. But if you have like a little bit of clipping, it doesn't matter too much, right? It's not that big of a deal. I think one thing that can be improved is just like these guys over here. Because all the rest of them, like they look so nice. But I feel like these guys kind of feel like a little bit flat. Comparatively, right? It feels like it's still block out at this point. You know what I mean? The other ones are finished, but this one is still feels like a block out. The buildings are all unique. Only the doors and the windows are modular. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Overall, really nice work though. Solid modeling as well. It's just when it comes to like the attention to detail, right? The stuff that we already talked about. I think most of it could honestly just be like the set dressing, right? Where like the set dressing is at this point like still pretty minimalistic, right? Like I'm kind of expecting to see what is this, like a cake shop? Oh wait, what? Oh, no, it's a bookshop. I was kind of just imagining like I'm imagining like a couple of stands with like books in them, you know, like on the outside. And then maybe there's like, I don't know, like a little one of those spinny things with like postcards. You know, stuff that you would see on the seaside, right? You have like these like very stereotypical like shops in here. That you can really start dressing up with stuff that you already have, right? You have these posters, you can just turn them into like postcards and stuff too. Because yeah, that's the thing that I would say. Like for example here, right? This is a pizzeria. You do have like a little outdoor seating area here, I guess. But just having like a couple of tables and a couple of chairs like on the outside. Right, just to dress up the space, and maybe there's like a bottle of water outside or something like that. Ah, so that's an interesting one, right? So I've heard that before, but it looks pretty empty, but that's how the concept art looks. But this is a unique opportunity for you to then be like, hey, do I like it or do I want to improve on it, right? Because I can almost guarantee you that, because I think you mentioned that you wanted to replicate like Overwatch and Valorant, right? The reason why they look so empty is because they have to be able to accompany gameplay into those levels, right? So if we then, let's say this is like a gameplay level and we start dressing up like all these areas, those are like all things that you hate in competitive shooters because that just gets in the way. But you don't have the same restrictions as they do. So you could just easily come in and just say like, hey, look, I'm going to make this like the prettiest thing that I can make. And I'm just going to throw like a bunch of like really cool ideas at it, right? So, I mean, this is tricky, right? Because maybe it's not that easy to see that context, but just looking at the concept and then realizing what it's made for can give you an idea of what you can do differently. So, kind of talked about like the more set dressing, right? That you want to deviate from the concept art. Yeah, the environment looks dope. I agree, Alex. It looks so good. I don't know if I said that before, but it does look really good. But that's a question that I'll leave to you, right? Like deviating from the concept art. Because yeah, like the general idea is that for ArtStation or your portfolio in general, you just want to make like the prettiest stuff that you can make, right? Because if you got that feedback from like a bunch of people that it feels a little bit empty, I can guarantee you that other people are going to feel the same thing as well, right? So that would be like a thing that you can then take, like improve upon. Yeah, a good opportunity to deviate from the concept art here. Because there's so many cool opportunities, right? Like the gift shop. Oh my god, it would be so fun to make like a bunch of trinkets for like a gift shop, you know? And just have like 2 stands outside and just smack it full of like, I don't know, weird little trinkets that you just want to make on the fly, right? I know that this is also like massively overscoping like the work, right? So this is where it becomes like, okay, I'm gonna have like these mood pictures, right? So for example, that's why I have this guy up here, because I think that serves like really well for just like selling the mood of the whole place, right? That's why this is such like a great image. And then you can just pick out like a couple of spots where you say like, hey, I'm just gonna dress this up and just make it look like this is like in business, right? So for example, the pizzeria, you could dress this up with like a couple of tables and then maybe have like, I don't know, a string, like light strings hanging from here and make it like feel like really nice and cozy, right? Or maybe, oh, maybe we can do this. And like a bunch of like lights up here. And maybe one over here as well. Ooh. And then we're kind of treating this as like a way of, okay, so we have the town, right? But we kind of want to make like these mini dioramas inside of that town and make them feel like really nice, unique, and cozy. So you kind of, because you got like so much potential here, right? And again, like this scene already looks like really interesting, right? But the way that I would look at this is that just looking at these individual shots, pick a couple of favorites and like really push them up to the next level by adding like a couple more props here and there and like almost treating them as like a separate environment, right? Where it's like, how do you make things stand apart? Or like, how do you make things still feel unique while having the consistency of the whole town, right? That's kind of what I'm going for. So you want to make them unique and treat them as like separate from each other as well. Yeah. And then a shot like this, you could maybe play into like the poster, right? Maybe this is like an artist gallery or something like that, and you just have like a bunch of posters, and there's like a person sitting here on a chair, maybe with a little thing next to it saying like, hey, these prints are for sale, you know, and then you can have just like a bunch of posters on the walls, like a person selling art prints. I don't know, just spitballing. There's a lot of fun that you can have with this stuff. Yeah, cool to see your work, George. Like this is awesome. Awesome little piece. I love the colors. I love the consistency between everything. And I think you honestly nailed it, right? Like in terms of like the style, going for like that Overwatch vibe. Not necessarily Valorant, but it definitely gives me like Overwatch vibes though. So yeah, cool stuff. And welcome to the community. Appreciate it. Lucas is coming in. Hello everybody, new member here, checking out some of the live streams and really love the content. Really appreciate all the time you put into helping others out. I appreciate it too. Like I appreciate you being here as well, Lucas. Like it's very rewarding to see people like on their own artistic journey and being like a small part of it, you know? So it gives me a lot of enjoyment. Thiago Klefke's vibes. Yeah. Been hearing a ton of good stuff from the course that he built. Okay. Let's have a look. Tom, where are you? Busy learning Unreal Engine. Oh god, this is just like a wall of text. I wouldn't mind some thoughts on the placement and the size of the rubble. Rubble is still very much work in progress. It's just my blocking shapes with some texture slapped on top of it. Oh, this kind of stuff. Okay. Loving the direction this piece is going, liking the environment, especially the arches and the columns. You're biased, Justin. You're biased just because you're doing columns, you know? It is looking really nice though. One thing that I would watch out for with these bricks is the visual noise that you're adding into it. Or, I mean, this is actually quite interesting because we talked about the same thing with Justin's work as well. Not this week, but last week, I think. Where you kind of want to soften that up a little bit by having potentially like the sand in there as well. Especially when it comes to this guy over here. Right? Where you have something that is like very visually like very noisy. And the way that you can solve that, instead of having like all these like individual bricks lying around, you kind of want to build like little mounds of like sand with like little bricks sticking out of. Right? And what that is gonna do to like your environment is you can use this like little mound to then also just like push into certain elements, and it's gonna blend everything together, because now this mound is also making sure that this pillar is like slightly underneath the sand. And then you can still have like all like the bricks on top of it too, but everything is gonna be like a bit better integrated with each other, and we're building up a mound that leads up to like the bigger object, right? So another way of thinking about this is thinking about it in terms of like big, medium, small, right? Shape hierarchy. And in this case, it's you kind of want to have a big shape right? With some medium shapes. And then you have like small shapes, like right next to it. Right? And this transition always looks like really nice. So the way that we're trying to do that here is we have the big guy, right? So we're simplifying the shape. We have the big guy. You have the medium shapes. And then we're kind of missing the small shapes here, right? But that's where this texture comes in really perfectly, because what you're doing is just you're slapping a plane underneath it that has like some of that smaller texture detail. And that's going to take care of like the transition here. And then where it becomes really interesting is because now we have this mound with like little pebbles, bricks, and then the big pillar, right? But where it gets really interesting is then you can start blending it together with the landscape as well. So these areas would just be like vertex painted. And because they're using the same sort of texture underneath it, the likeliness of them blending together is going to look really nice, you know? So yeah. Then like I said, you can have like this bridge between the two where you're just doing like vertex paint, right? And that's already set up because that's exactly what we're seeing here. So that is some good shit. Let's see if there's anything else. I'm imagining that a group of bandits started to clear the rubble to use the ruins as a hideout or a base. My main struggle at the moment is blending the blending of the dirt with the stone tile floor. I feel like the dirt isn't blending in quite right and the whole thing is lacking depth. Yeah. I think that has to do with just your texture setup. Because I'm not necessarily getting like a lot of information from like the normals necessarily. We get like a little bit of a bump here, but I feel like it's not enough to like do anything really. So when it comes to that, I would check your texture values. Especially the normal one, because this is actually pretty common. Whenever you say something like oh, this feels flat, you should almost see that as a sign of like, I'm gonna double check my normal map because something might be wrong, right? So I would definitely have a look at the normal map that you're using and then see if you can do something with that there. You can use a texture height map to blend materials in vertex painting, but that's already what's happening here, right? To a certain degree, I'm guessing. It's not that clear necessarily if that is what's happening here. But yeah, we'll add that to the feedback. That's a great point. So appreciate it, Luke. Because what Luke is pointing out is that there is height-based. You tried using the height lerp node? Okay. But it didn't work? It should work though. Like, this is a very common setup. What might be happening though is if you're already running into issues with your normal map and something might not be working out as good, or like the textures might not be set up correctly, then it's highly likely that the height map isn't going to be effective anyway, right? So I would double check like all the settings here. If you're using a height map, do the same thing for the height map too. But that's going to be very... And what, like a quick way of checking it out is that if it still feels flat, if you boost it like the normal by like, let's say 20, right? Just make it like fucking crazy, right? Boost it by 20. See if it like feels less flat. And if nothing changes, you know that something went wrong in the material setup as well, right? Something that's like a good gut check to go through as well. Let's see. I've also started playing around with the vertex paint, but on many assets, I'm lacking the necessary resolution. I'm wondering if it's okay to add a few vertices for that purpose. Depending on the density of the assets already, I'm not sure, because we don't have any like wireframes here, right? But oh, that's a good point to bring up as well, Ryan. Yeah. Make sure that your texture is set to like the right color space, because sometimes like Unreal fucks this up, especially if you're, this is especially important if you're packing multiple textures, right? You have to make sure that that's not set to sRGB. Usually what happens is like on import, if it recognizes that it's like a mask texture, it will set it to masks and it will disable the sRGB. But if it doesn't, you have to check that yourself, or set it to masks as well. That will take care of it too. What I was saying though is on the density of the topology, you usually don't need that if you are using height maps to blend them, right? You need some sort of texture to help with the blending there. If you're just only relying on vertex paint, it's never going to be enough. So you need some sort of support there from textures. But yeah, I think there was an example of like a Naughty Dog building where they had like a facade of like a building or something like that, and it had like a door here. I'm just like scribbling really quick, right? I think the texel density, or like the topology density for vertex paint was something like this. So way lower than people expect it to be. So it doesn't need to be high. Like if you have the feeling that you need to increase the vertex count for vertex painting, it is worth checking like all the other avenues first before you just like add geometry that's not going to add anything to the actual asset, right? Like about a meter. Yeah, I think it was like a meter or half a meter or something like that. It was pretty big. I bet that you can still find it on ArtStation because it was a post on ArtStation or something like that. Yeah. Finally, I would appreciate thoughts on the general composition and feel before I get too far in the set dressing stage. I think the composition itself can still use a lot of work because I'm still not sure what your main scene is supposed to be. I have the feeling that it's going to be like this tree, right? Because especially a tree in something that's man-made is always going to have like a lot of contrast, right? Because we have something man-made that is something like really organic. So those two in contrast are always going to like pull attention towards each other. But if you are thinking about like a group of bandits that started clearing the ruins to make it into like their camp or something like that, I want to see that first before we talk about the composition, because your composition is gonna change based on that as well. So what I would do is I would just quickly block in like all the elements that you need to make that story work, and then build a composition around it. That's what I would do. Because right now, if that is going to be the story, I am not really seeing it at this point. Like what I'm kind of imagining is I'm imagining like some sort of like really shitty tents set up, right? Just like, I don't know, cloth held up with like 2 sticks or something like that, with like a fireplace like in the middle or something, right? And like maybe like a couple of like bedrolls or something like that. That could be cool. But you just have to find like a spot for that and then build your composition around that before we dive into it. Yeah. That's my feedback. Really good looking scene though. I like where this is going. I'm a sucker for like destroyed stuff, so I like where this is going. Especially because now we're getting to a stage where like you're infusing like more detail into it. It's gonna look really cool. And you're making really good progress as well, especially compared to when we last looked at it. Really, really solid progress, right? So keep that up. Keep the momentum going. I'm gonna be right back. Give me a minute or two. Aesthetic is sick. Very gothic environment before Dark Souls. Zork Nemesis. Remember an old game? What? I've never heard of this. Aesthetic is sick. I'll have to look this up as well. Anything like the old Mist? Oh my god. Zork Nemesis is one of my favorites. Just reminded me that like there's a new Gothic game in the works. Like I was really surprised to hear that as well. Yeah. Came out in 95. Oh my god. I just got into like playing games at that point. No, not even in 95. Like probably after that. I still remember like one of the first memories that I have from like me gaming, like when it was allowed by my parents, was because my mom was teaching me how to cheat in Quake 2, I think. Yeah, it wasn't Quake 1 because that looked totally different. Sork is $4 on Steam. Oh my god, I need to check this out now. I'm gonna have a look after the stream. All right. Cool. Yeah, thanks for the recommendation. Next one up, we're gonna be looking at Ryan. Quake. Wow, memories. I recently replayed Quake, like Quake 2, with like all the DLCs and all the additional stuff that they added on top of it. Oh my god, I love that game so much. It's so good, especially the soundtrack. Oh, so good. Let's have a look at your work, Ryan. Glass ceiling, lighting tweaks plus the color grade. That is one thing. Like, you know this. I'm not that good at lighting, right? I'm not a lighting artist. I honestly think that this looks like pretty much on point. I like what you did with like the final image. I think it looks pretty much spot on, right? Like if I'm gonna compare it to like the actual thing. Go all the way back up. Yeah, the only thing that I can say is that the bottom of the image here in the original, right, has kind of like a greenish, almost like a slight foul like tone, right? So maybe that's like something that you can infuse, like a little slight nudge of like green in like the shadows somewhere. If you want to get closer to that, right? Because I don't know, otherwise I think this looks freaking awesome. So like a slight shade of green in the shadows. The current breakdowns, the attached below. Like I plan on adding a lineup of the assets, a video for the individual assets, texture breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. Are these current ones looking good? I would probably not present it like this. I would probably take your approach, honestly. Legacy of Kain. I have not played that game. I have not. But there's many games that I haven't played because, yeah. I was always sneaking out to like play games that I couldn't play back then. Where's the video? You had a video here. Here we go. I love this approach. And I love the idea behind the approach. It's just, in this specific one, it's not too clear that we're actually switching between materials, right? So I would say in this case, make it like really obvious, like where we are looking. Because now you did it in like a very subtle way, which I think works if you're really paying attention, but I think you have to like be a little bit more obvious here. And what I was about to say is that I love this approach where you're flipping through things. I think you can honestly use the same approach here as well for like your base color, normal, roughness, wireframe, all that kind of stuff. Instead of trying to do like the diagonal cut, because I don't think the diagonal cut is just, it just doesn't work on like a lot of pieces, right? Because ideally you want to be able to compare different sections from, or the same sections with different overlays, right? In an ideal way. So the way that I would honestly play it is use GIFs with transitions, right? Like you're already doing with the materials. Or do side-by-side comparison. And that would be something like you have like a frame like this, and then you just have like base color, normal, roughness, metallic, something like that, right? Something like that could work as well. This is where like personal preference comes in a little bit, right? I have no real preference between the two, just whatever you fancy more, or something else, right? I'm not just dialing it down to these two. Probably more cool options as well. Wait, that's not a photo? No, right? It's so freaking cool looking. Like, I feel like you nailed the vibes. A really, really good job, Ryan. Let's see. So current breakdowns, yeah, they're looking good. I like the presentation, like nice and sleek in terms of like the font usage and the way that you think about it, especially the video, right? I think the transitions and like making sure that people can read it as like, hey, I'm highlighting materials. You just have to, instead of like, I don't know, doing it at 10% what it is now, you can like boost it up to like 25% or something like that. And then maybe also make the first frame a little bit longer as well. The reason for that is because now we can take things in and then you like flip through things, right? And then it's probably going to loop, because what usually happens is that we're looking at like, oh, okay, the materials used here, and then you can look at like the final thing again and be like, oh, okay, this is the complete picture, right? Do a longer first frame and then make the call outs more pronounced. Any shots that I should scrap? Oh, sorry, I think that was like the previous post, right? So we don't have like all the shots here. Let me give you all a look as well, right? So let me move Discord down here for a second. So this one is nice. This is the original, right? So that's gonna work well. I'm honestly not too sure about this one, because it is the same thing, right? Not too sure. This one is great. This one is awesome. This one is good as well. Even though I feel like if you want to present like one of them, this is the more interesting one, right? But I'm not opposed to having this one either. Like, I think it's quite nice too. And then you have like more zoomed in shots. I would potentially look at like a zoomed in shot where you can tie this into the breakdown somehow, right? Because all the other ones are like nice overview shots. Maybe this could be one that you would use for like a breakdown, right? Just breaking down like the AC. And just have this as like an overlay where you're switching out the wireframe, base color, all that kind of stuff. Could potentially be an idea there. But yeah, I think the only thing that I will say is, well, apart from the landscape shot, that may not be that relevant, right? Because it's the same one. I'm gonna leave that up to you. Cut ? And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is you have to test the portrait shot. What I mean by that is you have to test that on ArtStation, because with portrait shots, they're usually like difficult to display, because you have the choice between like making it really big, but then I have to scroll down to see the whole thing, which is annoying. Or you have it like in full view, but then you have black bars on the side, right? Which is not good for the consistency of the post. So you're kind of picking between like two evils there, right? It's up to you, but I would kind of test what like your preferred way of doing it is, before you like commit to one. That would be like on our station. And then starting to think about the next project, seeing a lot of successful juniors, people have slightly larger scenes with exteriors of buildings and sometimes another separate piece. That's a difficult modeling showcase, like a vehicle or an impressive prop. Does that seem like an accurate read or the solid direction that you should be moving in? Would also be able to build specific skills, whatever direction I go. I'm gonna flip it around, and you've probably heard me say this like a bunch of times, but what are you interested in? What do you want to do? Because you shouldn't care about like what other people are doing, even if they got like a job through that, right? If you have this eye for detail, this sort of quality output with this art piece, I just want to see what you do with it and what you as an artist can bring to the table. Right? So that's what I would look at. I would look at it in that way rather than doing something that hopefully increases your chance of success. That's the way that I would look at it, right? You want to stay true to yourself, and then the company is going to just knock on your door at some point and be like, hey, look, we want to hire you. Your stuff is really good. Yeah, I had the black bars, so put the landscape right after at the moment, but not 100% on that. Yeah, you could do. I assume that was like the direction that you wanted to take. It's just, I don't know. There's no real good solution for this, right? It's just a limitation of like the picture that you referenced from, and you did such a good job on replicating it that, yeah. It's also not that big of a deal. You know, if you just have like the vertical one and like the horizontal one like right below it. No one's really going to care about that too much. Yeah, that's the way that I would look at it in terms of what you want to do next. Yeah, really cool stuff, Ryan. This was awesome seeing you like go through this. Really well done. And I think you can be really proud of like the end result as well. So great stuff, man. Awesome looking piece. Let's have a look. Next one is Olaf. Olaf is working on this pretty looking door. I would be glad if someone could critique it, even if it's about the presentation. I can push it in the right direction before putting it into my portfolio. But next direction, totally. Thank you so much. We'll think about it. No worries. Thank you so much as well. Okay. So in terms of presentation here, Olaf, never a fan of the black presentation. I like the black background. I honestly think I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because it would be like valuable to hold on, let me gather my thoughts here. Do something else than black. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say as well. Have a look at the portfolio reviews and see what you can get out of that in terms of portfolio presentation. I think that's gonna be way more valuable than me like repeating myself again here. But try to do something more. You have like a really good like inspiration here, right? So it wouldn't take you too much time to just grab like a couple of Megascan assets, make like a quick wall. Maybe make some like, I don't know, stuff that you can add to the wall as well, like little pieces, and then you got like a full wall that is looking pretty nice. rather than just like a door in the void, right? And then in terms of technical details, this is how the UVs and topology are looking. So the door is 9,500, and then price. $13,000. A lot of that is coming from like the organic bricks, right? Which is fine. With this kind of stuff, like mostly in games, is you're gonna lot it out like really quick. So you have like a bunch of like really nice detail up front, right? Because it is still a big asset. Like this is probably like the frame itself is probably like 3 meters tall. So I don't think this is necessarily like too much, because you can like optimize it really quick from a distance. So I don't think the door is like that bad. The frame, sorry. However, the door here, the thing that is probably like the easiest thing to optimize is this stuff over here. Because that is really dense, right? It's really dense geometry. And it also doesn't add a whole lot to the actual door itself. So what you could do is remove the ornaments. Remove like all the ornaments in the middle, and then keep the edge. So like this little edge you kind of want to keep, because that still gives you the feeling of like, oh, that's all detail. But the interior within that detail, you don't need that, right? Because that can just be like texture. If you really wanna make it look really cool, stuff like that can easily be used for POM, parallax occlusion mapping, for example, which is gonna fake that effect in a material. So that can be a way of looking at it. You could say you could potentially do the same thing here. The limiting factor here is though that this comes out, right? And it heavily depends on the silhouette of the whole thing. So you could either do that with like a simplified mesh that has like some opacity on the edges, or if you don't want to use opacity, you could then use like full geometry. What I would do with this guy on top though is, let's say we're looking at it from like a side angle, right? So this is like a side view. I feel currently what is happening is that the whole thing is like very slim. It doesn't have like a lot of depth to it. What I want you to do is actually like really emphasize like the depth of the whole thing, right? So especially the core, I kind of want to see that coming out more, because then it adds more depth to the whole ornament, right? It makes it feel like more 3D, and you're also justifying the use case for the geometry more, right? This is the way that I would do it. So I would, for zooming into it, I would pull all the middle sections of this stuff. I would pull that up and make it like more 3D than it is currently. So this is the thing, right? Like most of this stuff is not too expensive as long as you make the most use of it, right? Because you can have something that looks like really expensive, but if it's like, if the geometry is needed, then it's needed, right? It has a purpose. But yeah, the door can definitely be optimized. A couple of quick things. This is a very common thing. So number 2, that's basically this entire section, right? So notes on optimization. Number 3 is wood directionality. The wood direction. Because if you look at the door, and this is more texturing feedback, right? If you look at the door, the whole thing is textured in a way where it's just made out of like a single slab of wood. Like you have like all the directional pieces going just like straight up, right? What you want to do though is you want to find spots, like you can kind of see it here, right? This is like varnished like so many times that you can barely recognize the directionality. What you want to do is break that up a little bit. So this section over here, that is going to go straight up, right? That's going to go up. This section down here though, that is not going to go straight up. That is going from left to right. And that has to do with the way that like these doors are manufactured, right? Like usually these things are manufactured in such a way where they kind of go with the grain of the object. So if you have like, this is like a section of a door, right? We have that little door trim at the bottom. And then we have this like little inset over here. All right. And then we have that over here. And then this becomes like the middle piece, right? So if we then look at it from like a directionality perspective, we can then start to see that if we start breaking that up, this is going to go up. This is probably going to go left to right, same as this one. And all these individual pieces, they're going to have like a different directionality to them. Let me actually do this in green. Right, so these sections, they go up. Because like this is like an individually long plank with like the middle bits are just like connections between the two, right? So this is where the glass would begin. And this can be applied to the whole thing, right? So this is going to go up. This is going to go left. This is going to go up and down. You can see that directionality, right? And for this guy, it doesn't really matter. This is just like made out of like a solid block. So in this case, it just goes up as well. That's the big thing that I would keep in mind there. I'm going to keep it pretty light on the texturing feedback. There's a bunch of really interesting things that people are posting like in the chat at the moment though. So Ryan is saying the base materials are looking pretty solid. I like the wear at the bottom of the door and near the handle, right? So we're getting like a little bit of that. Let's see. In the wireframe of the arch tray, I'm not spotting anything with. Yeah, exactly. Wearing the edges on the brick edges might be a little bit soft compared to the reference. The wood grain is going in an odd direction at the top of the door, if you want to get nitpicky. I don't think that's nitpicky necessarily, because that's like the foundation of how this door was built, right? So that's something like really important to keep in mind there. And then for the texturing itself as well, you've got some really nice like localized damage already. I would really drive that forward and just be like all these edges. The reason why, who's bringing it up? Let's see. Yeah, so Brand Slam Dunk was saying for the wood, maybe think about more worn out spots where people would push the door with their hands and feet perhaps. All this kind of stuff down here. Right? That's because like people have been like kicking against it, or they like use their foot to like extra push against the door. All those things are like really nicely indicative of stuff that you can do with your texturing. So think about the context for texturing. Right. But I'm gonna kind of power through stuff here now because it's getting pretty late as well. But I hope that was helpful. We kind of went like pretty deep on this. So yeah. Thanks for showing your work, Olaf. There's a bunch of stuff that you can apply here. But overall it's looking pretty solid though. Some pretty good choices. I like the way that you're texturing it. And like really nice attention to like the silhouette as well. Especially on the door frame, like the door edges. So yeah, best of luck. Looking forward to seeing the next update. Next one, we got Alex. Let's have a look. Questions for the metal poles protecting the propellers in the standing frame. Should I use trim textures or would it be alright if I keep them on the same UV texture? Try to reuse. Oh, glad to hear that, Olaf. Happy to help. For the poles protecting the propellers, if you have something that you can like reuse, use that. Because the thing with like those poles is you can just map them on like a pretty generic section of metal and it's gonna look good, right? Because you just need like a pretty generic thing. So yeah. There's no need for a new texture necessarily. It just depends on what you have, right? Yeah. Any other feedback is welcome. No, I don't really have anything else. Not this time around. You did do a lot of changes to like the actual design of the thing as well, which is pretty interesting. Because it feels like compared to last time, you're removing yourself a bit more from like the really nice soft shapes that you had going on. So that might be something to think about, especially on the wings, right? I would say don't lose those soft shapes. "20 seconds lag." Yeah, I know. I think that's just like standard YouTube lag. Yeah. Other than that, I don't really have too much more to add here though. Yeah, just reuse where possible and make sure that you don't lose those like nice curves and like soft shapes, right? You added a stand. Yeah. It's interesting though, like, does it need a stand? A standing frame? Yeah. Because that would be for like landing on like the sea floor or something like that, right? It just depends on if it needs that. In terms of like the actual design of the thing, right? Where maybe it doesn't really need like a stand. I don't know how common that is with submarines actually. Because most of them, I don't know. Most submersibles have that? Oh yeah, if most submersibles have that, then that's good. I am not too up to date with my submersible knowledge, so yeah. No, cool stuff, Alex. Thank you for the little update as well. And best of luck. last one for today, we have Malta. For feedback, any thoughts on the progress so far? Pretty generic question. I don't know how to answer that one. I believe they need to stand when placed on the boats before they deploy. Oh, that makes sense. It does make sense. Topo updates are looking good as well, by the way. Only seeing it's the same as Tim pointed out. Yeah. Yeah, so let's have a look. So any thoughts on the progress so far? I think it's going good. Great job. I don't know how to answer that one. Is the trim sheet implemented well, or should I dial it back a little bit? Let's have a look. I think for strips like this, right, where you have like long, continuous sections of things, is I want to see you break them up a little bit. That's the main thing that I have to say there. I mean, they look decent, you know? Also try to, and this is the most interesting thing with trims, right? Like try to be a bit more creative with the application of them. For example, what I'm seeing is that you have like a lot of nice bevels. What I'm kind of missing is I kind of miss like, well, to be fair, like you're doing it here. Like little insets, you know? Or like maybe a bigger inset that has like a bunch of stuff on it, and then maybe the bottom comes out like more than it does currently and has like, I don't know, a couple of steps to it or something like that. You know, trying to make like the design of the whole thing like a bit more interesting. And then also functional too, right? Like if this is a base, how are people navigating? Right? Like what are they like paying attention to? Because I would imagine that there's gonna be like, I don't know, like little sections with like little towers here that have like lights on them or something like that, right? Just to indicate that like, hey, there's gonna be ships here, so be careful where you're fucking flying, you know? And it's stuff like that. You have to make sure that a trim, well, in this case, it's more about design. The design needs more functionality. And for that, you really dive into functionality. And for that, you can really make use of your trim sheet, right? Like all the different elements of your trim sheet need to tie into that functionality somehow, right? And the way, it's not only like the trim sheet itself, but also like the way that you use the trim sheet too, right? Oh. Yeah, exactly. Like guiding lights, like look at like the stuff that we have currently and see how you can implement those things too, right? Also, how does the right side of the image work currently? I added some stuff to populate like the rocks in the building. And I was thinking of a ship to be the main focal point of the side. I'm just unsure if it needs more to stand out. I mean, it depends on what you're going to do with the ship, right? Because right now, the ship doesn't... It stands out a little bit, but I'm kind of torn between, like, the tower here. And it basically also, like, why is that tower there? Right? Like, is that a part of a different facility or something like that? But I don't think, like, the ship itself needs more to stand out. I think once you're gonna add like the lights and all that kind of stuff to it, I think it's gonna be enough. What I would keep in mind though is the size of the lights, right? They're like a really, really good indicator of like the size and scale of things. And it's used very effectively like in all sci-fi movies, right? Even if you look back at like the really old ones, like Akira, for example, like just the size of the windows indicates like the scale of the place, right? So I would honestly make them like pretty tiny, almost like little specks in the distance. What I would honestly be tempted to do, and this is going to sound crazy in the beginning, but it's actually not that bad, is actually build like just like a fucking cityscape, right? It's just like a big cityscape around here instead of a tower, and just make it feel like there's this like massive city in the distance. And this is almost like, I don't know, like a centrum where they do some sort of like delivery to it. Maybe you can then like connect it with like a long pipeline that's just like connecting the whole place, right? Because otherwise, what is like the connection between like number 1 and number 2, right? What is their connection? My screen is small, but the ship looks like it's flying to the left. Maybe if it was flying towards us, it would demand more attention from the viewer. Yeah, I think that also has to do with the way that it's currently looking and the shape of it potentially, right? At this point, it's kind of like pretty undefined. But to hammer on that little city in the background, it might sound like, oh my god, you're fucking crazy. You want me to do like a whole city? This city in the back is just like cubes with emissive lights like cut into them, right? Nothing more, nothing less, because it's going to be so far into the distance that no one's going to care about like the actual shapes, right? Maybe the silhouettes, you can change that up a little bit, but that's going to be, I kid you not, that's like an hour of work. As long as it's far enough in the distance, no one's going to care. And also really play into the scale of things, right? Because that is going to be really important. That's also why I added this like pipeline here, right? Because that pipeline is going to give you like an excuse to just be like, hey, look. And it's a very crude but like effective approach, right? Like this pipeline over here is going to be that big, and it's going to be vanishing lines, and it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, you know? And it's just, it goes from something that's like really recognizable and it becomes like really small. And because that pipeline is just like this small now, you can get the scale of the buildings in the back, right? Oh crap, Tim already said it. I'm late. Yeah, is that YouTube delay? Lights on the ship, stars in the back, having tower structures in the back would consider that city for sure. It's mostly silhouette work for that scope wise. Yeah, exactly. We'll fill out the frame pretty well. I think so too. But it doesn't need to be a city, right? If you want to go with that guard tower, you could, well, it's not with that tower, right? It's not a guard tower necessarily. If you want to go with that tower, that's fine. I would just add some supporting structures next to it to kind of give it like a bigger purpose, right? If that is, for example, what you could also do, like screw the city, right? We're not making a city anymore. Maybe that tower is like the radio control tower, like you would see on like an airfield, right? And then just duplicating like the structure that we have now, and to have that like a couple times in the distance could give you a connection that this is like a massive base that is like all separate from each other for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're doing like dangerous research or dangerous production or something like that as well. For the background, would you recommend a matte painting or simple models? Oh, simple models, especially if you can't paint. I would not do a matte painting. Especially if you're gonna be working on like 3D environments, right? I mean, for me, you already have like some emissive here, right? It would just be like hour of work. Where like a matte painting to make it look really good or like decent would probably take you longer. And also, if you then rotate the light in your scene, you have to adjust the matte painting again, right? Whereas with simple models, like they just react to like things. Yeah, that's about it, I think. I'm just unsure if it needs more to stand out. Yeah, like it definitely needs more if you want to make the ship stand out, right? And I'm more curious about like the connection between the two as well. So yeah, definitely use scale and make sure that you focus on making things stand out, right? Using all the fundamentals that we talked about in your previous work, where it's like, how do you attract people to look at things? And right now, the tower, because it's emissive and it has lights on it, like is pulling our attention more, right? So yeah, something to think about. Thanks, Tim. It's good to know. No worries. No worries. All right. Cool. I'm going to be switching it up to here. We still got 24 people here. Thank you so much for watching. Oh my god, I can't believe that. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone taking the time for posting their work. If you want to get your work featured here as well, become a part of our community. Pretty easy. Go to the website, sign up, get access to it, and you can be included in next week's stream when I do one again. And just massive shout out to like all the people that have shared their work. Let me give you like a quick overview of them again. It's like we had all these beautiful people and their work that we looked at today. Freaking awesome work. Great stuff, everybody. With that being said, I'm not going to make it any longer than... yeah, throw a like on the stream like Ryan is doing as well. Appreciate it, Ryan. But I'm not going to make it any longer than it needs to be. It's midnight in France, and if that is like any sign that I need to go to sleep, that's probably it. So, again, everyone, thanks for being here. Appreciate it a lot. And if you want to become a member as well, go look in the description, become a member yourself, and have a nice night, everybody. Bye-bye.